A workplace accident, a pregnancy, and a turning point in their lives. Ellie and Marcus were struggling through tough times, desperately searching for help. But sometimes, when hope seems lost, fate has a way of bringing unexpected saviors into our lives. One stranger saw them in their darkest moment and became their hero, changing their lives forever. Get ready for a journey of justice, the building of a loving family, and the rise of an unexpected friendship. Everything was about to change for them. Lately, Ellie had been under more stress than ever. In her 6th month of pregnancy, she found some comfort whenever she felt the gentle flutters and tiny kicks of her baby moving inside her. It was a reminder that amidst all the chaos, a little life was growing, a part of her and Marcus that they would soon hold in their arms. Yet, despite that fleeting comfort, everything around her seemed to be falling apart. The day Marcus had his work accident, their lives changed in an instant. One moment, things were tough but manageable, the next, they were spiraling into uncertainty. Marcus had broken his arm in a serious workplace accident, an injury that not only caused him immense pain but also forced him to step away from work indefinitely. The sudden halt in his ability to provide for their growing family left them in a state of fear and frustration. From that day on, nothing was the same. Marcus, once a strong and healthy young man, found himself confined by his injury. It wasn't just the physical pain that tormented him, it was the helplessness. The feeling of watching Ellie take on more than she should, knowing she was carrying their child and already dealing with so much, made every day harder. They were waiting for the insurance money, holding on to a thin thread of hope that it would come through and ease their financial burden. But the process was slow, and the uncertainty was unbearable. Worse still, the workplace denied that the accident had happened on site, claiming that Marcus's injury was not their responsibility. As a result, the insurance company refused to pay out a single cent. Ellie felt torn between her worry for Marcus and their mounting financial struggles. She was expecting their first baby, a moment that should have been filled with excitement and joy, but instead, it was overshadowed by medical bills, rent, and everyday expenses that seemed to multiply overnight. Their savings, which had never been substantial to begin with, were dwindling at an alarming rate. Every passing day made it harder to see a way forward. With no other option, Ellie swallowed her pride and went to a nearby restaurant, explaining her situation and practically begging for a job. It wasn't what she had imagined doing while heavily pregnant, but she had no choice. She needed to work, needed to bring in whatever income she could, even if it was only enough to put food on the table. The long shifts, the constant standing, the exhaustion, it was all secondary to the desperate need to survive. Every day, they waited anxiously for news from the insurance company, but the waiting only added to their despair. Despite everything, Marcus refused to remain idle. Even with only one functioning arm, he tried to do what he could around the house, pushing himself beyond his limits. But no matter how much he wanted to help, his body fought against him. Simple tasks became overwhelming challenges. He was growing weaker, both physically and mentally, and the frustration of his helplessness gnawed at him. During those exhausting days, Ellie remained his rock. She did her best to comfort him, offering patience and words of encouragement even when she felt like breaking down herself. They leaned on each other, drawing strength from the love they shared. It wasn't easy, every moment was a battle, but their connection was the only thing keeping them from falling apart completely. Ellie knew she had to be strong for their baby. Even as they struggled with financial instability and an uncertain future, she was determined to minimize their expenses and save whatever she could. Every penny mattered. Every small sacrifice meant a better chance at giving their child a safer, more stable life. The thought of welcoming their baby into the world gave her purpose, a reason to push forward no matter how difficult things became. She worked for as long as her body allowed, refusing to give up even when exhaustion threatened to consume her. Each day, she noticed the concern in Marcus's eyes, the way he watched her with a mix of guilt and helplessness. She didn't want him to feel that way, didn't want him to think he had failed their family. So she put on a brave face, pushing through the pain and fatigue, determined to make it to the next day. Then, one evening, as she finished her shift and walked home, her legs and ankles throbbed unbearably. The weight of her pregnancy, the long hours on her feet, and the stress that seemed to press on her shoulders all collided at once. She could barely carry herself, every step a struggle. But she kept going. Because she had no choice. Because survival was all they had left. What she didn't know was that their story was about to take an unexpected turn. That help would come from the most unlikely place. And that soon, everything would change. Forever. Ellie preferred to blend in. She wore loose-fitting clothes and tied her apron loosely, making sure that her pregnancy wasn't obvious to those around her. She didn't want pity. She didn't want special treatment. More than anything, she didn't want people to look at her and see someone struggling. She just wanted to be seen as another hard-working employee, just like everyone else. Her focus remained on two things: taking care of Marcus and the baby, and bringing hope back into their home, even when hope felt like a distant dream. Every shift was exhausting, but she pushed through, knowing that every hour she worked was another step toward survival. One day, while she was taking a customer's order, a sudden cramp gripped her stomach. The sharp pain made her body tense, and without thinking, she instinctively placed a protective hand over her belly. It was a reflex, something she barely noticed, but her coworker, one of the few people who knew about her pregnancy, rushed over immediately, concern written all over her face. Ellie knew this sensation well. These cramps were normal, something she had read about and experienced before. So, despite the lingering discomfort, she forced a small smile and waved off her coworker's concern. "I'm fine, don't worry," she reassured her gently, not wanting to draw any more attention to herself. Her coworker hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded and stepped away. But Ellie wasn't the only one who had noticed the moment. The customer she had been serving had caught the entire exchange, and though he remained silent at first, the expression on his face shifted: concern, curiosity, something close to sympathy. He hesitated before speaking. "I think you're PR Prant." His words stumbled slightly, as if he wasn't sure how to phrase it. Ellie stiffened. Pregnant. She had worked so hard to make sure no one noticed, to carry herself as if everything was normal. She didn't want her pregnancy to be the defining thing about her, especially not at work. She didn't want to be treated differently, didn't want to be seen as fragile. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to respond calmly. "Yes," she admitted with a small nod, "but don't worry, I'm fine." She quickly continued taking his order, hoping the conversation wouldn't go any further. She just wanted to do her job. She didn't want anyone looking at her with pity or concern. But the feeling of unease wouldn't leave her. As soon as she sent the order to the kitchen, she felt her breath shorten. The weight of everything, the pregnancy, the work, the constant struggle, pressed down on her all at once. She needed a moment, just a small moment to herself. She quickly walked away and slipped into the restroom, shutting the door behind her. The second she was alone, her hands gripped the edge of the sink, and a slow, trembling breath escaped her lips. She had been holding everything in for so long, forcing herself to keep moving forward without a pause, but right now, she couldn't stop the emotions from overwhelming her. Her eyes burned as hot tears welled up, and before she could stop them, they spilled down her cheeks. The exhaustion, the stress, the constant pressure, it all blurred together. She wasn't just tired. She was drained. She wanted to be strong. She needed to be strong. But in that moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had been carrying. After a few minutes, she inhaled deeply, wiped her tears away, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't have time to break down. She didn't have the luxury of stopping. She had a job to do, a family to care for, and a future to fight for. Squaring her shoulders, she adjusted her apron, straightened her posture, and stepped out of the restroom. She would keep going because that was the only choice she had. What she didn't realize was that someone had noticed her struggle. And soon, a single act of kindness would change everything. Ellie and Marcus's journey was far from over. Their struggles, their resilience, and their fight for a better future were still unfolding. If only they knew that life had a way of surprising them when they least expected it. That evening, after the dinner rush had settled and the restaurant was winding down, Ellie returned to check on the customer who had noticed her earlier distress. He had finished his meal and was now leaning back in his chair, lost in thought. As she approached, he looked up and offered her a kind smile. "Thank you," he said sincerely, his voice carrying a warmth that caught Ellie off guard. He then reached under his glass and pulled out a small piece of paper, sliding it toward her. "Please, take this," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Call me if you need help." Ellie hesitated for a brief moment before taking the folded paper. The man gave her a final nod before rising from his seat, paying for his meal, and exiting the restaurant. She watched him go, a lingering curiosity in her mind. Who was he? And why did he want to help? As she cleared the table, she tucked the note into her pocket, deciding to look at it later. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of exhaustion, her mind weighed down by the day's events. It wasn't until she got home and changed out of her work clothes that she finally pulled the small card from her pocket and examined it closely. It was a business card. Lucas Sterling, attorney at law. Beneath the printed details, there was a short handwritten note: "If you're having issues with your job or pregnancy, contact me. I'd be happy to help." Ellie stared at the card in disbelief. A stranger, someone she had barely spoken to, was offering assistance. But why? What had he seen in her that made him want to reach out? She turned the card over in her hands, considering it carefully. She had never imagined asking for legal help, but something about this gesture felt significant, almost like a small light flickering in the darkness of their struggles. That night, as she walked home with slow, tired steps, she told Marcus about what had happened. He listened intently, his brows furrowing in thought. "He probably thinks you're being mistreated at work," Marcus guessed. "From the outside, seeing you hiding your pregnancy, looking stressed all the time. Maybe he assumes something worse." Ellie nodded slowly. It was possible. She had gone out of her way not to appear vulnerable, but maybe, in doing so, she had only drawn more attention to her struggles. After a long discussion, they decided to call the lawyer. Even if it was just to clarify the misunderstanding, maybe, just maybe, he could provide some guidance. The next day, Ellie dialed the number on the card, her hands slightly trembling as she held the phone to her ear. "Hello, this is Lucas Sterling," a steady voice answered. Ellie hesitated for a second before speaking. Hi. This is Ellie. I met you at the restaurant yesterday. You left me your card, and I just wanted to explain there's no problem at work. I was just having an emotional moment." There was a pause on the other end before Lucas responded, his voice filled with understanding. "I see. I didn't mean to intrude, I just got the sense that you were going through a rough time." Ellie exhaled softly, grateful that he wasn't pressing the issue. "It's been difficult," she admitted. And before she could stop herself, she found the words spilling out about Marcus's accident, the insurance battles, the uncertainty of their future. Lucas listened without interrupting. When she finally finished, he spoke carefully. "I understand," he said. "It sounds like you're facing a tough situation, but I may be able to help. If you'd like, I can meet with Marcus and evaluate the situation legally. Workplace accidents can be complicated, and insurance companies are known to avoid paying what they owe." Ellie's heart tightened. The idea of having legal support sounded almost too good to be true. But then reality struck her. "Unfortunately, we can't afford a lawyer," she said softly, the weight of their financial struggles crushing any hope before it could take root. Lucas was silent for a moment, and then, in a voice filled with quiet resolve, he said something that would change everything. "Let's not worry about that just yet. Let's just talk and see where we stand." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone was offering help not for money, not for obligation, but simply because they wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point they had been waiting for. Lucas immediately offered a solution. His voice was steady, calm, reassuring. "It's not a problem," he said without hesitation. "We can have a meeting tomorrow. Please come, I'd be happy to help." His certainty caught Ellie and Marcus off guard. Help had never come so easily before. It had always been something they had to fight for, something that slipped through their fingers just when they thought they had a grip on it. Could this really be as simple as it sounded? That night, as they sat together in their small, dimly lit apartment, they spoke cautiously about what was to come. Why would a stranger want to help us? Marcus wondered aloud, running a tired hand over his face. What does he gain from this? Ellie sat beside him, cradling her belly absent-mindedly. "I don't know," she admitted. "But what if this is real? What if he actually can do something for us?" Marcus sighed, leaning back against the worn-out couch. "We said we wouldn't get our hopes up, remember?" She did remember. Every time they had let themselves believe that something good might happen, it had ended in disappointment. And yet, no matter how much they tried to guard their hearts, hope still lingered in the cracks. "We don't have a choice but to try," she said softly. Marcus nodded. Even if it was a long shot, they couldn't afford to ignore any potential help. So, despite the doubts clawing at the back of their minds, they decided to move forward, albeit a little hopelessly. When they arrived at the address Lucas had given them, Ellie and Marcus stopped in front of a large, impressive building. It wasn't some small law office tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was a firm, a well-known firm. The name on the plaque by the entrance was one Ellie recognized, even though she had never imagined herself stepping foot inside a place like this. For a moment, they both stood there, hesitant. The grandeur of the place, the polished glass windows reflecting the world outside, the tall doors that seemed to belong to people far more powerful than them, it all made them feel unbearably small. Ellie shifted uncomfortably. "Are we in the right place?" Marcus double-checked the address on the card. "Yeah," he said, swallowing. They exchanged a glance. They had expected a modest office, maybe even something informal. This felt like walking into a world that didn't belong to them. "We should go," Marcus murmured, doubt creeping into his voice. Ellie, feeling a familiar desperation rising in her chest, shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "We're here now. Let's at least hear what he has to say." Taking a deep breath, they stepped inside. The inside of the firm was even more intimidating than the outside. Everything was sleek, professional, and efficient. The kind of place where real cases were handled, where real problems were solved. They moved cautiously, their presence feeling out of place. They had spent so long struggling on their own that trusting someone else, especially someone with power, felt unnatural. A receptionist greeted them politely and directed them toward Lucas's office. As they walked through the long hallways, Ellie noticed the air of quiet confidence that filled the space. It was a world apart from the chaos and uncertainty they had been living in. Soon, they reached the door. A moment later, it opened smoothly, and Lucas stood there, welcoming them in with the same calm energy he had shown at the restaurant. "Welcome, Ellie and Marcus," he said with a warm smile. Despite his high position, there was nothing intimidating about him. He gestured toward the chairs in front of his desk, offering them a seat before casually asking if they'd like something to drink. Marcus shook his head. Ellie did the same. Lucas didn't press. Instead, he turned to Marcus with a focused but kind expression. "Tell me everything," he said. "I want to understand exactly what's been happening." Marcus hesitated for only a second before he started speaking. His voice trembled slightly at first, but as he continued, his words grew steadier. Ellie sat beside him, listening in silence. Every word that left Marcus's lips carried the weight of their struggles, the injustice they had endured. Each syllable felt like reopening a wound that had never truly healed. Marcus explained it all. How the accident had happened. How his employer had refused to acknowledge it as a workplace injury. How the insurance company had turned its back on him, leaving them drowning in financial uncertainty. How he had given everything to that job, his time, his effort, his health, only to be discarded the moment he became an inconvenience. Lucas listened attentively, not interrupting, not rushing him. But as Marcus spoke, Ellie noticed something subtle, a slight tension forming in Lucas's jaw, his fingers lightly tapping against the desk as if he was processing everything with a sharp, analytical mind. When Marcus finally finished, his shoulders slumped slightly, as if the act of speaking had drained the last bit of energy he had left. "My workplace didn't defend me," he said, his voice quieter now. "They denied my insurance claim, saying it wasn't a work accident. But I worked so hard. I put in so much effort." Ellie's chest ached at the pain in his voice. She reached for his hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Lucas exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. He was silent for a moment, his brows slightly furrowed. Then, finally, he spoke. "This," he said firmly, "is a clear legal violation." Ellie and Marcus exchanged a glance, a flicker of cautious hope passing between them. Lucas closed his eyes for a brief moment, gathering his thoughts. When he opened them again, there was a determined glint in them. "Let me handle this," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Ellie and Marcus felt like they weren't fighting alone. As Lucas listened to Marcus, his mind raced through every legal avenue available to them. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became what had happened to Marcus was not just unfair, it was illegal. The company's actions were a blatant violation of workers' rights, a disregard for legal regulations, and a deliberate abuse of power. Denying a workplace injury, refusing to support an injured employee, and shifting blame to avoid responsibility, this wasn't just negligence. It was an outright attempt to escape accountability. Lucas clenched his jaw slightly. He had seen cases like this before, but every time, it frustrated him just as much. Companies that saw workers as disposable, treating them like mere tools instead of human beings. The law existed to protect people like Marcus, but so many were left to suffer simply because they didn't have the resources to fight back. Not this time. He looked at Marcus carefully. He could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his shoulders sagged slightly from the weight of months of stress. He knew exactly when a lawyer could no longer just sit back and watch. The company had abandoned Marcus. They had not only refused to defend him, but had actively left him to struggle on his own, ignoring his pain, his financial burden, and the fact that he had risked everything for them. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. As Lucas considered the best way forward, he wasn't just thinking about justice, he was thinking about Ellie and Marcus's reality. He could see how deeply they were struggling, not just financially, but emotionally. The weight of uncertainty, the pressure of their situation, the sheer exhaustion of trying to hold everything together, it was overwhelming. This isn't just about a workplace accident, Lucas thought. This is a chain of abuses. A system failing the people it was supposed to protect. Marcus and Ellie shouldn't have to fight this battle alone. Marcus's voice, raw with frustration, broke through his thoughts. "Every day we wait for the insurance money," he said, his tone edged with bitterness. "But we don't even know if it will come. And the insurance company isn't doing anything. We're stuck. We don't know what to do." Lucas exhaled slowly, absorbing every word. He had already made up his mind. "Yes, you're right," he said, his voice steady. "Your workplace has acted against the law. Refusing to recognize this as a work accident is entirely on them, it is their fault. They knowingly put you in this situation when they should have supported you from the start." He leaned forward slightly, his tone firm but reassuring. "This is a legal violation. And it's something we can fight." Marcus took a deep breath, the tension in his body evident. His next words came out slowly, carefully. "So, what happens now?" he asked. "I mean, you don't have to help us. You might not even be able to. But I just want you to know that these people did nothing to help me." Lucas nodded calmly, his expression unwavering. "This shouldn't make you feel guilty," he said. "You're right. Whether it's the company's negligence or the insurance company's irresponsibility, neither of these mistakes should leave you as the victim." He leaned back, his gaze locked onto Marcus's. When a company fails to take responsibility for a workplace accident, the law is very clear. They can be held accountable. And that's exactly what I want to do. I want to take this case and fight for what's rightfully yours. We will pursue this until the end. For the first time in a long while, Ellie felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope. A small but undeniable light in the darkness. But before she could speak, Marcus let out a breath and asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of frustration and disbelief. "A lawyer like you, with a firm this big, your way out of our budget. What's your real reason for helping us?" There was silence for a brief moment. Then, Lucas smiled. A genuine, warm smile. "My wife and I have been married for 5 years," he said softly. "And thank God, we've been very happy together. We've been lucky in many ways. But we never had a baby." Ellie blinked, caught off guard by the personal confession. Lucas continued, his voice laced with quiet emotion. "My wife was always heartbroken about it. We tried IVF many times. We hoped, we prayed, we tried. But it never worked." He exhaled, his eyes momentarily distant, as if recalling years of longing and disappointment. "And then, I saw Ellie." He looked directly at her now. "I saw her working so hard while pregnant, pushing through exhaustion just to make ends meet. And I knew there was something more to her story. I thought maybe there was negligence at the restaurant, that she might be struggling alone. I didn't know the full picture yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wanted to help." His eyes softened. "Because you're going to have a baby. And that means something to me." There was a deep sincerity in his words. "No matter the circumstances, you've ended up in this difficult situation because of someone else's mistakes. And that isn't fair. You deserve better. Your baby deserves better." Ellie felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected this. A personal connection. A shared pain. A genuine desire to help. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, trying to compose herself. Marcus, too, seemed taken aback. He took a deep breath, processing everything before finally speaking. "Thank you," he said quietly. It was just 2 words. But in them carried the weight of everything: their struggle, their desperation, their unspoken gratitude for finally finding someone who cared. Lucas gave a small nod. "Don't thank me yet," he said with a determined glint in his eyes. "We still have a fight ahead of us." And with that, he got to work. Lucas wasted no time in setting the legal process into motion. As Marcus's attorney, he drafted a formal letter addressed to Marcus's former employer, a direct and unmistakable warning. The letter was precise, backed by legal statutes, and carried a clear message: Lucas was prepared to take this case as far as necessary to ensure that Marcus received the justice he deserved. There would be no more manipulation, no more excuses, and certainly no more abuse of power. When the employer received the letter, panic set in immediately. He had underestimated Marcus. He had assumed that Marcus, struggling financially and burdened by his injury, would simply give up, that he wouldn't have the means or the courage to fight back. But now, things had changed. He realized his mistake, but he had never expected things to escalate this far. Fearful of what a legal battle might expose, he rushed to consult his own lawyer. It didn't take long for him to agree to a meeting, hoping to negotiate a settlement before things spiraled further out of control. Not long after, Marcus received an initial offer, his long-awaited insurance payment. It was something, but Lucas wasn't about to settle for just that. "This isn't enough," Lucas stated firmly. Because the truth was, Marcus deserved far more than just his insurance money. He had suffered physically, emotionally, and financially because of the company's negligence. The way they had abandoned him wasn't just wrong, it was unforgivable. Lucas pushed forward, refusing to back down. And by the end of the legal process, Marcus wasn't just given his rightful insurance payment, he also received a significant compensation package. Justice had been served. And just in time. As the legal battle was finally closing, another life-changing event was rapidly approaching Ellie's due date. The stress of the last few months had been overwhelming, but through it all, Ellie had stayed strong. She had worked, she had fought, and now, she was about to welcome their child into the world. Then, on one magical night, after hours of labor, Ellie gave birth to their baby. A new life. A new beginning. It was a moment filled with emotion, relief, and above all love. Without Lucas, everything would have been so much harder. Without his help, they might have never received what was rightfully theirs. Now, not only did they have justice, but they also had stability. They had enough money to support themselves for a long time, and Marcus, his strength returning, was already searching for a new job, eager to rebuild their lives. One day, as Ellie rested in her hospital room, cradling her newborn in her arms, a familiar face stepped through the door. Lucas. He had come to see them, to share in their joy after everything they had been through together. Marcus and Ellie looked up, their eyes filled with nothing but gratitude. "Thank you, Lucas," Marcus said sincerely. His voice was steady but heavy with emotion. "We don't know what we would have done without your help." Ellie, smiling warmly, looked down at the tiny bundle in her arms before turning to Lucas. "We had a boy, Lucas," she said, her voice filled with quiet happiness. "And now, we can finally share the good news." Lucas's expression softened. He stepped closer, looking at the small, delicate baby in Ellie's arms, and something inside him shifted. This child, this new life, was coming into the world in a home filled with love, strength, and resilience. He would grow up with parents who had fought against the odds and won. Lucas's heart swelled with emotion as he spoke. "This baby will grow up in a home filled with love and care," he said gently. "He's so lucky to have parents like you, hardworking, determined, and kind-hearted." Ellie and Marcus exchanged a glance. Then, with quiet certainty, Ellie turned back to Lucas and said words that left him speechless. "Lucas. You made such a big difference in our lives." She took a slow breath, looking at the man who had helped change their future forever. "That's why we've decided to name our baby after you." Lucas's eyes widened. For the first time in a long time, he was the one caught off guard. His throat tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. He paused, blinking back tears. "I did what I had to do." His gaze softened as he looked at the child once more. "And this baby will grow up in a loving home exactly the way he deserves." And so, on that day, after a long and difficult journey, a little boy named after Lucas was born. Ellie and Marcus had finally found justice. They had built a family, a strong, loving family despite every obstacle that had stood in their way. And through it all, they had learned one undeniable truth: the most important things in life aren't wealth or power. They are love, cooperation, and the unwavering strength to move forward, no matter how dark things may seem. In the end, Ellie and Marcus found the happiness they had always deserved. But this was just the beginning. If this story touched your heart and you love hearing more inspiring real-life stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Show your support by hitting the like button and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Turn on notifications so you never miss an uplifting story about resilience, justice, and unexpected friendships. Join us as we share incredible journeys that prove love, hope, and determination can change lives.